Welcome to Experiential Design Week. I'm Eric Duncan, Senior Experiential Designer at IA Interior Architects. Each year, IA hosts Experiential Design Week to celebrate the unique role of art and design within our larger architectural practice. This year, we'll be joined in conversation by a roster of creative luminaries from around the globe to discuss their creative processes, to consider the value of experience, and ostensibly to draw connections between their work and our own. For each conversation, I'll be joined by one of my colleagues at IA, each of whom bring their own unique perspective and will also ensure that I won't be the only voice you hear this week. Today, I'm fortunate to be joined by Ashley Michaels, a senior designer in IA's lighting studio, and we're thrilled to chat with today's guest. Surrealist, radical, utopian. There's no easy way to describe Burning Man, the massive gathering in the Nevada desert that celebrates art, culture, and radical self-expression. I've seen it described as an adult do-it-yourself Disneyland, an 80,000 person camping trip with an art infestation, and as Mad Max meets Dr. Seuss. If you've ever been on the internet, you've already been dazzled by the spectacular and immersive works of art at Burning Man. There's nothing else like it on the planet, and that's why it's such an incredible privilege to speak with today's guest, who leads Burning Man's mythic art department. Strap in, because this is going to be good. Katie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Wow, what an intro. I'm like, who is this person? I'm just so honored to be here today. My name is Katie Hazard, and like you said, Eric, I'm the head of the art department at Burning Man. Really looking forward to our conversation today. Thanks for having me.
And I know 100 different people will have 100 different responses, but can you describe Burning Man to someone who's never been or someone who may not even know what we're talking about?
You're right. I do feel like everyone has their own interpretation and perspective on what the event is like. My main way to describe it is that it's a city. You know, the Burning Man Project is the organization, but the event is Black Rock City, it's called. So the organization lays the infrastructure. We survey the streets and we do kind of the city planning. We provide emergency services. We provide rangers, which are kind of like our self-policing organization. But the participants that come to Burning Man provide the content, and they provide the kind of content you would see in a lot of cities. I mean, it's a different version of it, but we have libraries and cafes and yoga classes and a post office and kind of like restaurants, or there's a whole range of things that you might see that people are coming together and living in this city for 8 days in the Nevada desert. It's quite a different thing. Like the cafe there, there's no money involved, so everything is on the decommodification principle. Sometimes people think there's a barter system, but it's not even that. People just find the thing that they love to do and they bring it to Black Rock City and they offer it up. So if you make a mean grilled cheese, maybe your thing is you make grilled cheese all day and you just give it out to anyone that wants to come along and have some. So that kind of restaurant is different than you might see in the real world, but it truly is a city.
And of course, there are a million reasons Burning Man resonates with its attendees. What about it resonates best with you?
That's a great question. The first time I went to Burning Man was in 2000, and I was young, and I had an undergraduate degree in art history, and I was working with museums. And, I did say it was a city, but one of the things is that all cities have some form of public art, but that's really, really over the top in Black Rock City. There are usually almost 400 art installations there. The layout of the spaces, there's a living space, and then, probably 3 times as much of that is open space for art installations to be placed. And so I came from a art history and museum background, more like traditional art. And the first year I went, I remember just being kind of blown away that there weren't any labels on the art. I think I was accustomed to the world where you walked up to an exhibition, you read, who's the artist and what am I supposed to be thinking about this thing? Before I even looked at something myself, I waited for someone to tell me what I was supposed to think about a thing, which takes away a whole layer of agency in your life. And so to be out there and to see all this art and to see that people just made it out of whatever they wanted to make it out of, it didn't have to be the sort of fine art. I remember my first year, there was a sculpture of a woman, a figural shape, made entirely out of books. And she was sitting cross-legged reading a book. And it just sort of blew my mind that, oh, like that can be art too. And I can think about it whatever I want to think about it. I can read the titles and see if she was trying to make a statement about that, or, it gave me more direct access to someone else's self-expression and creativity that I hadn't experienced before. And I find that's really groundbreaking. I think in all things in Black Rock City, the art and otherwise, it's sort of a different kind of reality. And so you can see for yourself, there was a project this year that was a big sign that said reality is malleable. And I feel like that's a real lesson that you get at Burning Man, because you have to bring your own housing and your own food and set up your whole life there. And you start to realize, oh, I'm capable of doing this. I can decide how I want to make my housing or make my food, and make the choices of who I camp with and what kinds of activities I get involved with while I'm there. And then you start to see, oh, for me anyway, I sort of went along the path that was expected of me. I went to a good college. I, did all the steps. I got a good job. And then it was like, oh, I don't have to just behave the way that I think I'm supposed to behave. I can back up a minute and be like, wait a minute, how do I really want to live my life? What's my direct way to access self-expression and agency?
Well, so I can imagine certain people's days, like an accountant, I can imagine them driving to work and reviewing financial spreadsheets. Burning Man has a much more mythical quality, though. So I wonder if you can tell us about your role and a typical day in the life.
One of the things that's really interesting about this work is that it's iterative. We have the Burning Man event once a year, and then we have another whole year to get ready for the next one and to tweak it and make improvements. And then, but it is a year till you have another chance to do these things. So I find it really engaging. I've been with Burning Man as an employee for 9 years now. And the reason why it's so engaging is that my year is different all the time. So every January looks like the January before it, but it looks very different from July, for instance. So I have this real cycle that makes things seem interesting. My day job when I'm not at the Burning Man event is a lot of meetings. It's a lot of, spreadsheets and writing and editing and problem solving. And, I do oversee the art department, but I'm also a senior staff person in the organization. So I help make some decisions around organizational direction and strategy. My day in the life at the Burning Man event is pretty wild. It's such a radical change of one thing to the next. Like, there was one day this year where I woke up at 6 a.m. and I went out to our temple. There's a temple at Burning Man every year that's kind of the spiritual home. And it was the day that they had just finished building. And so the group of builders, about 100 people, they finished building, and they have about an hour to come together and just have a moment in the temple before they kind of turn it over to the city. So I was invited to be part of that, and people were all just really speaking from their hearts. And I did a little bit of a blessing and a gratitude moment, and not a dry eye in a house. This is like one really like that sort of experience. And then from there, I needed to go to, there was an old timey train station art installation, and they were having their opening that morning, and I had said I would come. So I went over there, and there it was like hoedown, like champagne corks popping and overalls. And, and then I had to be in that kind of moment, and met those people where they were for that. Then I went to a meeting that was the heads of all the other departments. That was like very operational and logistics and giving facts and stats. And, like then I'm in that facet of myself. Then I'm at a brunch that's a thank you for artists, and, hearing from lots of people that I only have been corresponding with by email all year, that I'm meeting in person and hearing all their stories. And, then I had an HR issue there. We have 250 volunteers in the art department, and there was something between two of them that wasn't working perfectly. So then I'm trying to sort out an HR issue. And then this is all before lunchtime. So this is like when we're at the Burning Man event, each day feels like it could be practically a month in there. Like, it's so much packed in from one thing to the next. It's a lot. And it really calls on all these different parts of myself to be able to, be good in all those situations. And so I'm really grateful that I get to have a job that really, pulls from lots of different parts of myself. And it's really challenging and really fun.
So you mentioned that you first went to Burning Man in 2000. I'm curious, how has the festival and the artwork itself changed over the past 20 years?
Well, I think the scale has really changed. At that point, it was about 20-some thousand people, and now it's at almost 80,000 people. So that in itself is a big difference. The principles and the values are the same. It's still, everyone comes and participates however they can. And there's a real sense of, there's a line called no spectators, that everyone comes and offers whatever they can offer. So I would say the culture is similar to what it was. The scale has really changed. And also it's come into the kind of cultural awareness. People know what Burning Man is now. When I started going, I was living in Boston, and working at Harvard University and nobody had heard of Burning Man, for sure. Like it just, people hadn't heard of it yet at that stage. And so in the Bay Area, it was more known before then, but it's taken a while. But, it's probably been the last 5 or 10 years now that, say, like my parents' friends know what Burning Man is, that it's really become more well known. And as a result of that, at least in terms of the art landscape, we have a different range of people that are interested in contributing artwork to Burning Man. So one of the things I love is that anyone can bring art to Burning Man. There's no curatorial judgment process around that. Things just have to be safe and not make a mess and not have a corporate sponsor. But otherwise, you can make something in your own garage or backyard, and we're not going to say like we're going to say yes, please, like bring what you want to bring. And some of the people that were bringing that kind of work in 2000 are the ones that are bringing these like really monumental, professional seeming large scale things now. That there's kind of a cycle of people, either starting to be crew on a project and learning for themselves, or starting off small and bringing it big. But I think that there's a lot more artwork per year than there was then, kind of like I was saying with the population scale. I think in those days there were maybe 30, 40, 50 projects a year, and now we're at the like 350 to 400 kind of scale.
And so there are hundreds of art installations, as you've just mentioned, from the massive to the micro. I listened to your conversation with Stuart Mangrum, where you talked about the process by which 75 of those installations receives funding from Burning Man. Can you walk us through that selection process?
That is one of the areas where there is a little curation, you might say. So we have an annual budget of 1.3 million that we give out as grants funds to artists. And we have a letter of intent process. So we get somewhere around 600 to 700 people submit a short form letter of intent, and we check those for eligibility. And then we invite about 350-ish to 400 people to submit a full proposal, which is a lot more complex and detailed and full budgets, and as you might imagine. And then we have a committee of about, I think there are 8 of us, and we read every one of us reads every one of those 300 and some full proposals, and we all make our own comments. And then we have a series of really fun meetings where we just go through them one by one and help and we talk about each one. And what's interesting is other grant making systems that I've been part of, you're just looking to make the best, you're picking the best projects that there are. So there's another grant program that Burning Man offers called Global Art Grants, where the grants happen out in the world. And for that, you can have 2 things that might be slightly similar, but one is in the Czech Republic and one is in Argentina, and so that's fine. But in this case, what we're really looking to fund is a complete collection of artworks. So we have these 75 spots, and it's our only way to be sure of what art is going to come to Burning Man, because otherwise we're not commissioning anything. It's just what comes to us, like a responsive method. So what we're trying to do is have enough of the big and medium and small, and enough things for kids and families, and making sure we have enough international artists. And do we have enough fire, but not too much fire, because we're really thoughtful about sustainability. And every year there's a theme to Burning Man, and so we want to make sure that there's some interesting representation of the theme. And so we're really looking to fund a collection. Like, this year our theme was Animalia, and we had a lot of great turtles. And some of those turtles were probably better than some of the other things that were possibilities, but you don't want to fund 5 turtles, so ultimately you are sort of picking the best in its category up against one another. And we also do really look at sustainability. We're looking for projects that really are making a focus on either using recycled or upcycled materials, or just being thoughtful about their power usage, or there's a number of ways that they can work on sustainability. And we're also increasingly looking at diversity. This year, the committee was really like, let's fund more women artists. I read something that gallery representation is less than 10% for women in the US. And kind of like, how can that be? Like, that's horrible. What era do we live in now? And so the place where we have some power to make that change, we're like, let's pay attention to the gender of the artist and really try to fund more women. And so I'm proud that we funded, I think it was 43% of our grantees had a lead artist that was a woman.
And so nothing must surprise you anymore, and yet everything must constantly surprise you. What are some recent highlights or pieces from this year that left an impression on you?
Well, there's a range of types of surprises, right? Someone submits a rendering and it's really just their best guess of what it's going to wind up being, because most of the work doesn't already exist before we fund it. And so some of the time I have this thing built up in my head and you get there and you're like, wait a minute, that's not at all what I thought it was going to be. Some years I have some surprises like that. I didn't really have that this year. There were some things that were different than what we thought. But for instance, there's a woman from Morocco who brought a project called Moroccan Party, and it's TEA at the end. And it was this beautiful Moroccan filigree teapot. And her original plan was to have it on a kind of a platter with some cups, but she revamped it and there was no platter anymore. But instead, she did all these other things besides the platter. So I was a little bit like, oh, the platter's gone. But instead, there were all these little water cisterns and they were serving mint tea to everyone that came up, like way deep out in the desert so people could come along. And she built it in her hometown in Morocco, just with people that she knew in her community there. And, they shipped it all the way here. And so some surprises are like that, where she just changed her process. It evolved as she was building it, and it didn't make sense to do a tray anymore. And she had this idea to be serving the tea. And so it all evolved in a really lovely way. And there was another project I loved this year called Burden of the Beast. That was a buffalo, a tall buffalo on long, long legs. And the torso of the buffalo was a home. So there was a ladder and you could go up inside this buffalo, and there was like an old timey home on the inside. And the face was made out of driftwood. And that's the kind of thing you can't really tell how it's going to be until you see it, because, the artist doesn't know what the wood's going to look like. And I remember when I rolled up on it at Burning Man, and it was still in pieces on the ground, but I could see the head there. And I was kind of like, which way is the front? And I walked around till I got to the place, and I was like, wow, like the shaggy, furry, he managed to find a way to take this driftwood and really make you feel like you were looking at the head of a buffalo. And so it all went together very nicely. And that piece was cool. It kind of had this statement of, he's from New Orleans, that artist, and it's about climate change and people losing their homes and what happens when people get displaced and have to have their homes become more mobile.
I saw some images of that buffalo piece and it was absolutely incredible. So inspiring. Have any submissions in the past ever inspired you to create or propose work for potential funding?
Well, I couldn't really propose within my own system because, it's just certainly a conflict of interest. And plus, I really would not have a moment's time to even try to get involved in building something. I have been part of artworks that have been built before I started working here. But honestly, once I started, I was like, oh, this is, the build season is like my full on time for that. So now I find my ways to be creative in, one of the ways is that I place all of the art. So that's a really fun opportunity for me to get to, that's sort of my artwork, is to decide where all the rest of the art is going to go.
Well, and we're mostly talking about the large scale works that have become so synonymous with Burning Man. But of course, anyone can bring any artwork, as you've mentioned. And there's a ton of great smaller objects each year as well. Can you talk about some of these?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, certainly when we're funding projects, we look to make sure we have some definitely smaller things in the mix, because we have this initiative called Celebrate the Small. And I feel like the large stuff gets intimidating. For me, if I were just coming to Burning Man and I saw all that art, I would think I could never do that. That just seems beyond what you can do. But then you see some of the smaller things and you're like, oh, I have some of that stuff laying around in my garage, or, maybe I could try to do some small thing like that. Like this year, one of the small pieces I loved, and I didn't even know what it was called until I had to look it up afterwards, because, of the almost 400 projects, like I know lots of them, but I don't know every single one of them. And there was one night my husband and I were out, and the way Burning Man is laid out, it's there's a trash fence, we call it, at the very far edge of the city to catch any garbage that might blow out, to make sure that we can clean it up. And there's usually some of the weirder, smaller stuff out by the trash fence. The big monumental stuff is places where people can take pictures and make sure we see it. But and we also take artist requests into account when I place the art. And the people that have some of the weirder things tend to want to be way out by the trash fence. So my husband and I were out one night and it was dark already, and we were riding our bikes along, and we thought we saw something. Sometimes there you see a big light and you're like, let's go see what that thing is. And you ride to it. And one of the joys there is that you have such a range of depth when you see the art, that from really far away, something might look like something. And then you get closer and you're like, oh, it's that. Like, this year there was a project that was made out of the kind of cubes that you store water in, like big cubes like this, all stacked up, and they became pixels. So at nighttime, there was like amazing light patterns that played over them. But from far away, it looked like maybe it was a screen. But when you got right up to it, you're like, oh, they're water cubes. So it's fun to see things from far away and up close. And so my husband and I are riding our bikes along, and so this thing was like, is there even something there or not? And we thought we heard a little sound, and we went up to it, and it was lit enough that you wouldn't run into it, but not a lot. And it was just a simple structure holding some reused propane tanks of different size, compressed gas tanks, like this and around. And I was like, oh, what's supposed to happen here? And we got off our bikes and we were looking, and then we saw on the ground there was a little basket with mallets of wood in it, and we're like, oh. And so we started hitting them, and they were chimes or gongs, and each one had a really different tone and really beautiful. And so we could, you could gong it and like move your head around it and get different feelings. And he and I just had a blast, like playing with each other and making it loud, and then like waiting for how long the gong sound would go, and just things like that they're simple. Like you don't have to be a professional artist or something to do this, and you don't need to rent a build space. And, that's the kind of thing that's not intimidating, but intimate, and gives people, a real hands-on interactive experience.
So you mentioned you're responsible for the placement of artwork around Black Rock City. What goes into your thought process to determine where these pieces live?
It's quite a process to think about where you want to put almost 400 artworks in a relatively big open space. Where do you start? Like, where do you start thinking about it? And one of the things that I have liked to do in the last number of years that I've been doing this is I kind of sometimes have like a little secret narrative behind the scenes that people will never know, but that I have a little fun way to get something started and, just have something to start from. And so this year with the Animalia theme, the man itself was on a base that kind of looked like a beehive. It had a lot of hexagons and honeycomb shapes. And then the temple this year was a flower. It was an upside down desert rose, sort of like this with the stem going up. And we didn't plan that. It just happened that we had this beehive in the flower. And of course, bees and flowers go together wonderfully. And so I started thinking, well, how can I bring that into how I'm placing the art this year? So I started thinking about how people at Burning Man are sort of like bees, like we're zooming around from one thing to the next. And it's such people from all walks of life are coming in there. It's such a kind of crossroads of types of people. And we're all kind of pollinating all the places that we go. And I was like, well, then where does that lead me still to placing the art, And I talked to this friend of mine that has a lot of bees, and I was like, tell me more about the flight patterns of bees. And I thought a lot about it, and I was like, okay, listen, I don't have all day. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make hexagons. I'm going to take the most monumental projects that are coming this year. And so on an overview, if you were looking, like taking the man in the temple, they're usually like this, they'll be the basis. So I plotted out the other largest pieces and made a series of 6 hexagons overlaying the whole playa. Now, of course, one of those projects canceled, and another one of those projects was like, oh no, we're going to be smaller than we thought we were going to be. And, I don't know, I'm curious to see some drone shots of the whole thing to see if my plan worked at all. But it was a fun way to, to have somewhere to start from. And that's the kind of thing that nobody's going to know. But like, I want to have fun with what I'm doing while I'm doing it. So that was my start for this year. And then I look at what artists are requesting for their placement, and I really think practically too about where they're camping. And we don't want them to have to be, most art needs daily maintenance, so you don't want them to have to be going back and forth all the time. And so thinking about that. And then you can't really dictate the experience of a participant there. Someone can be coming at something from any different angle. It's not like a gallery where there's a clear traffic flow or something like that. Like literally people could be coming from almost every angle. So all you can do is kind of make some zones of things that play well off one another. And there are some promenades, like streets that have spires with lamps on them that lead up to the man. So along those promenades, I'll often put kind of more figural work or sculptural things that aren't going to be loud or like really drawing big crowds to block the streets off. And I do think about the projects that burn. This year we had 13 projects that were planned to burn. And so they each have quite a big perimeter around them to make sure that, as they're burning, there's not an issue. So I map those out early on too. So there's space for all of those things. And then there's always that play of like, I have a couple turtles. Like, should I put them all in a row and they could be turtles all the way up? Like I talked about turtles again. We had more come. Or, do you put like things with like, or is it more fun to put different things with different? And so I just play around with that and do a little bit of each of those things. There's an area of the city where a lot of the families and kids camp. So coming out from that area, I try to put a lot of things that might be fun for families to play with. So yeah, there's a range of things. Some projects want a lot of dark or quiet around them, so you have to put them with enough space around it. So it's kind of a mix of, creative and practical and whimsical and fun. And people come up to me during the event and they say, like, I can't believe what a great job you did. Like, I saw this and then this and then this. And I was like, I don't know if I don't really take any credit for that, honestly, because I didn't know that was going to happen. But that's just the sort of thing that does happen. And I will say there's a little bit of margin of error because it's all by GPS, and we're out there with iPads trying to use something, and sometimes two projects are closer to each other than I would have liked. Or some years when I started doing art placement, I would drive around and be like, oh, that's not right from that angle, or that looks too close to that. And this year, for the first time, I really felt like I let go of that and was like, you know what? It's Burning Man. Like, I'm not trying to stage a house for sale here. Like, it's not all like a perfect, everything's perfect. It's like, it's kind of great if that thing lines up with that thing and that gong's going off next to that, whatever. And, like, I feel like I was able to let go a little bit and be like, the whimsicalness and the cacophony and the disjointed stuff is part of what the beauty is here.
Well, in that same interview I mentioned earlier with Stuart Mangrum, you discussed the representation of Mexican, Chicano, and Latinx artists at this year's event. It's an incredible reminder of the vibrancy of those cultures. And I wonder if you can talk about how Burning Man is cultivating relationships with artists in those communities.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see the amount of interest level that came from artists and collectives that are south of the United States and the rest of the Americas. That like I was saying earlier, I do think the word about Burning Man is getting out more and more, and on a more global scale. We're seeing an increase in international artists applying every year, and which, like, believe me, can you imagine the logistics of trying to make something in your country and send it over on a boat, and customs and visas? And I just am so impressed by the people that bring art from another country. It's quite a phenomenal effort. And we do actually have someone on my team that specifically supports international artists because it is quite a challenge to make that all happen. Also, like I was saying, that we don't commission the art, it is a little bit of a responsive thing. And I feel like something has happened in which the communities and the cultures of the Americas have just caught on to Burning Man. And I feel like we saw a few pieces here and there. Last year in the man base itself, we that is a place where we do commission some artists, and one of my colleagues did invite a number of artists from Mexico to do some mural work and some other installations in the man base. So that could have also helped grow that. There's a large art car that's been coming from Mexico for a lot of years called the Mayan Warrior, and they did some work touring around Mexico. And so I think that they sort of spread some of the word about it as well. So we did see more people submitting applications for funding from those areas, and we leaned into that too. How we were saying that I was saying that how important it was we wanted to fund women this year, and when we do make that collection, it's kind of sort of like with placement, like how much like with like do you want, or how much do you want to try to make things spread out a little bit of everything. And there were so many projects that came in this year, I think especially related to the theme, like axolotls and quetzalcoatls and alebrijes and a bunch of things like that. And rather than just being like, okay, let's pick one or two representative ones, we also had someone on our committee that was like, this is great. Why don't we just embrace this and invite all of the whole range of everything from that region? And as a result, I think it really made for a richer experience on Playa.
I've heard you talk about the importance of the process in art making. Obviously, the finished product is the thing we see, but you've shared stories about the skills people have developed during the process of making this work. Can you share a little bit more?
That's one of the things I love so much about Burning Man art is that well, most of it is built in community or in collective. There are a few things that come, possibly the guy with the gongs that we experienced last night, he maybe had one or two people help him, but that seemed like a kind of singular project. But many of the works you see there are built by groups of people. And one of the things that happens, so two pieces. One is I feel like there's the capacity building and skill building side of things where this may be the first time you've ever submitted a grant application or had to do a budget for a project or managed a team of volunteers or did some project management skills or Gantt charts or things like that. There's a lot of the management side of things where you learn skills, but then there's a lot of the building side of things where people learn how to do all kinds of stuff. I've heard people talk about how, they come to work on a project as one of the crew members, and people teach each other how to do things, and then they come away and build their own shed in their backyard, or whatever the thing may be. Like there a lot of them are really practical skills that you can go on to do afterwards. A range of things like lighting, for instance. Ashley, like everything at Burning Man has to be lit because there's no civic lighting per se, except on the promenades, but everything needs to be lit well. And people are riding their bikes and riding in art cars, coming from every which way. So, really for both for safety and aesthetics, you need good lighting out there. And that's not something that comes now. People don't just know that stuff. And there's, especially the way that technology has developed so much in the lighting field over the years that I've been going to Burning Man. It's some people, you can really tell when people have paid a lot of attention to how they want their lighting to be, versus just sort of a spotlight kind of effect. And so anyway, there's a range of different, I guess you'd say, both soft skills and technical skills that go into building a project there. So I feel like when you look at the final product, you might see that and you might be able to tell, like, oh, look at this welding and look at this stained glass and look at this lighting. And, you can see some of the stuff. There must have been engineering in here to figure out how to anchor this. And but the piece that you don't see behind it, I think, is the relationship building. That, like I was saying, many of these things are built in community, and people come together and they really form tight community bonds through doing this. My own example is my husband. Now, I worked on the project that he got a grant for from Burning Man years ago, and he wasn't my husband at that point in time. But our group of friends kind of coalesced around. It was a loose community of people that really coalesced around this project and made really tight friendships. And his business partner for many, many years came out of doing that project together. And that was almost 20 years ago. So that's my personal example of it. But you hear many, many cases of community building and relationship building that come as a result of these projects. So to me, I love the final product, like going around Burning Man and just being wowed by the things that are there. It's like, human ingenuity and self-expression. It's spectacular. But I am grateful that in my role, I see all the things that came up to being in this place. Behind this project was a woman from Oklahoma and a woman from Mexico who met and came together and worked on this together. And, I know all the stories of their family and, everything that's happened to make this thing be the thing that it is. So I had a mentor that used to talk about the process over the product. And I feel like this is a true example of that phrase.
Well, this is an incredible segue then. You had mentioned lighting. Burning Man is this incredible art incubator. One of the most fascinating things I learned recently from one of your talks was about the Bay Bridge lights in San Francisco. I had no idea that the artist and the art itself had roots at Burning Man.
That's right. In fact, the artist is named Leo Villarreal, and he is on our board of directors now. But he has been going to Burning Man since the 90s and was not a lighting designer at all. And initially wanted a way to be able to find his tent when he came home at night after a night out. Because, think about that many years ago, 20 some years ago too, there weren't really LEDs or, there were headlamps, but not a whole lot of other stuff. And so how are you going to find your tent with all these other tents in the sort of relative dark? So he developed a thing to put on his tent so he could find his way home. And he was like, oh, that was fun. Let me make it more interesting next year. And then from there, over the course of all these years, he's developed into, an amazing and well-known, well-celebrated lighting designer who's done work all around the world. He just did a bunch of lights on bridges in London, and, he's always up to something interesting. And it's nice to have someone that got their start in their field with something so practical as, trying to find their tent at night. But it's also really nice to see something as monumental as the Bay Bridge have a connection to Burning Man project. That it's fun for us to kind of say, I don't know how many thousands of people see that every year, more than thousands. But to know that had its genesis or its home through Burning Man is a fun little thing to think about.
Absolutely. That's such an incredible story. What actually happens to all of this incredible artwork once it leaves Black Rock City? Do most people's become civic art, or are they acquired by museums?
I wish I had more of a story about this than I do. Honestly, my role is to support the part basically up until getting it home. And then we do try where we can to do some matching about people that are, people certainly do write into us and say, like, oh, I've got a library in Oklahoma. And do you know anything nearby? And I have, an informal list in my head of in my team, people we know who are trying to place their art. So we do some matching like that. Um, like I said, it's a very small number of things that get burned, probably about 3% of the total work. A lot of people think like, oh, you just burn all the art and you go home. And I'm like, oh, that's not it at all. Like it's, we're very thoughtful about what gets to burn and people have to apply. And, we're thoughtful about the carbon offsets around that. So a small percentage of things get burned. Some things, I mean, artists are responsible for taking them home with them. So some things are unfortunately in storage, which isn't great to know, but that's a piece of it. Some people install them locally. They work with their own town, or they happen to live somewhere where it's something that they can install, in their own property somewhere. Some things certainly do get sold, and we're happy when that happens. Like I said, there's no commodification at Burning Man itself, but certainly if somebody sees an artwork that they want to buy, we have a website listing all the projects and contact info for all the artists. And so we're very pleased when something gets out into the wider world and the artists are able to recoup some funding for their project like that. There are a few pieces that wind up in museums, which is always fun to see. It's such a different context to be inside a museum than outside in Black Rock City, but that is another home for some projects.
Well, so I was always an East Coast kind of girl, before coming to California in 2020. I first came to really know about Burning Man in 2018 when I saw the incredible exhibit No Spectators at the Renwick in DC. Everything blew me away. But one of the most moving installations was a large-scale recreation of Burning Man's temple. It was totally arresting. I've never experienced anything like it. What was the origins of Burning Man's temple and how has that evolved?
The first temple was in 2000, which was also my first year at Burning Man. And it was brought by two gentlemen who had a mutual friend who had passed away in a motorcycle relatively recently. So they didn't put a whole lot of thought ahead of time into it all. They just had this close friend that they had lost and they wanted to build something kind of as a memorial to this friend. So I remember seeing it. It wasn't in the, now it's kind of ensconced in its place in Black Rock City where it always happens. But at that stage, it was along the Esplanade, just in its own little place where they wanted to put this installation up. And people wound up seeing that it was a memorial, and they added their own little notes on the walls, and a couple people put photographs up, and it became kind of a place for anyone to have a memorial. And so the artists recognized that that was a need in the city. Like I was saying, it's a civic setting, and there's all the needs that people have when they all come together to live in a place. And this is a need that people have to have a spiritual center. So it started off as a place of kind of memorial or grieving or that sort of thing, but it's also very much a place of celebration and joy. And you see many weddings happening at the temple. And you see this year I went in and I saw a guy who had a didgeridoo playing, or people just go in there and, they kind of have their moment, and people, see people sitting quietly in meditation, or there certainly are many, many memorials all over the temple. If you see photos of people and, just people write on the wall things that they want to release or let go of, or whatever it might look like. So anyway, in 2001, they brought back another version, and then it was enough that the Burning Man organization said, this is really important and something that our community needs. And would you be willing to keep doing this? And so one of those two artists, his name was David Best, continued to go on and build the temple every year for many, many years. I think he's done 14 out of the total that we've had. He hasn't done one recently, but he does help select who the next temple is going to be at this stage. So we're actually just about to open the grant program for the 2024 temple next week on September 26th. We already kick off the cycle for the next year, because the temple really is one of the biggest projects in Black Rock City, and people need quite a lot of time to, just to build something of that scale with that many people involved. They need a lot of time. So we open that one right after we get back from this year's Burning Man event.
And I think I just read that those wooden tablets from the Renwick that people wrote messages on at the museum, those were actually sent to Burning Man the following year and burned in that temple burn.
That's right. In fact, I should have talked more about the temple burn, but that's kind of the big part of it. So those things that we wrote there, it was David Best that made the temple at the Renwick, and had the pieces there. And part of the the feeling of burning something is kind of a releasing of it. I think that's kind of a deep human feeling that, if something, the temple serves as a place where people can place their grief, their sadness, their joy, their whatever it is that they need to let go of, and put it in there. And then there's something about the purity of the fire, of kind of burning it away, that really helps people let go and process something that's going on with them in their lives. So the burning is kind of a key element of it there. And that was one of the first things that also struck me in my early years at Burning Man. Like I said, coming from the museum world where everything's all about preservation and climate control and everything, and then to just burn a thing, I was like, how could you? And then over the years, I've spent a lot of time doing different Buddhist practices and really appreciating impermanence. That talking about the process over the product, it's the relationships people build, it's the skills they build, it's the moment people have of enjoying the project itself in Black Rock City. Like, that's the magic part there. Like, trying to keep it around and keep it perfect and keep it whatever, like that just kind of can become a drain, actually, of maintaining it and whatever. So there's something really beautiful, like a Tibetan monk sand mandala or something, about it's about the making it and the enjoying it, not about the trying to hang on to it forever.
So you spoke about the process for funding select works of art, but your team also chooses which temple design to use is used each year. Can you talk about that process? Like, how many submissions do you typically receive?
It's a significant undertaking to build the temple at Burning Man. And it's unlike the other projects. Some projects have to cancel right before Burning Man, and we're okay with that. I mean, life happens and people do their best. And if something's missing, no one's going to miss, one other something. But if the temple doesn't happen, people are absolutely going to miss that. And so it's almost part of the civic infrastructure in a way that it can't kind of fail. So there is a lot more collaboration between the Burning Man Project organization and the temple artists than there are with other projects. And because it's such a big project with such high media visibility and cultural visibility, we get a range of types of people with different motivations for wanting to build the temple. Some of the motivations are a little bit more around wanting something in their portfolio, or being able to say, I built the temple at Burning Man. And really what we're looking for is someone that doesn't care that much about that part, but just has some personal vision, or really like a personal drive that they want to be able to offer that space to the community. So for instance, this year we had a couple people submit. We had a number of people submit, and we had it down to 3 finalists. And one of them was quite a long shot because she wasn't a builder. She hadn't brought big art to Burning Man before. She'd been coming to Burning Man for a long time, but not as a builder. But we loved her idea, and we loved her because she was just so genuine about why she wanted to do this. I mean, she was really motivated by her heart. And in the end, we selected her and felt so pleased by what she was able to do, because she could surround herself with a lot of experienced architects and engineers. But at the end of the day, she wasn't doing it for her own ego or portfolio. She was doing it because she genuinely wanted to offer this up to the people of Black Rock City. And you could see in her style of leadership, and she would just talk about love made visible through this sculpture or through this structure. And before their work days, she would kind of they would have conversations about putting your heart into your work. And just to have somebody that's coming from that place, I felt like was palpable in the final structure, that it really felt warm and feminine, and there were some really beautiful flower chandeliers, and the whole thing, it just really came across well that she wasn't trying to prove anything or show off or she just wanted to generously from her heart make this offering. So while we are very interested in the design itself, it has to have a lot of room for people to leave their offerings, and it has to have multiple entrances and exits, and there are a number of kind of design parameters that we look for. It's not supposed to be any denomination. We really want it to feel inclusive of everyone, but we are as interested in the character of the person who is the lead artist as in the structure itself. We check references, we do interviews with the finalists, almost like a job, because we really want to find out, why do you want to do this? And we do partner so closely with someone that when someone maybe isn't in it for the right reasons, it really does kind of come back to haunt us. So it's important about the person as well as the design.
So I always like to talk to creatives about imposter syndrome, something we all experience, but rarely want to talk about. Certainly your work must help validate others, but I wondered whether self-doubt has plagued you, and if so, how you get beyond those feelings.
It has, because in my role, I'm overseeing the selection and installation and placement of these almost 400 works of art. There are a lot of skills that it takes to make that art that I don't have. I don't have any kind of background in engineering. I'm not a builder of any sort. I am much more interested in the medium of people than in the medium of creating objects. I mean, I have a vast appreciation for what people can create. And so there's a part of me that's kind of like, oh, I should know like every type of heavy equipment and what it does. And I should know like all the ways that you can anchor an artwork to the thing. But then I'm also like, when I described my day to you at Burning Man before, I'm not anchoring any projects. I'm not, operating any heavy equipment myself. I have a very capable team that I've surrounded myself with that have lots of expertise in that side of things. And what I need expertise in is working with people, and curation, and things like placement and curatorial direction. I feel like that I feel confident in, and I really enjoy people. I enjoy getting to know people. I enjoy problem solving, and so things like everything from the temple blessing to the hoedown to the operational meeting to those are all things that I'm good at and I enjoy. And it does take so many facets of a person to be able to do the role that I do. And I do think like, I'm not going to do this forever. And who's going to come after me? And how do I want to, I like to think about that because it's important to everyone in every job they're in to think about who's going to come after them. So, but I do kind of feel like the imposter piece comes from not having some of the technical skills that are involved in Burning Man art. And it's generally pretty quick after that I'm like, but I don't need that in the role that I'm in. In the role that I'm in, I need to be able to be a leader and manage, a team of 20 some employees and 200 some volunteers and 400 art installations that each have their own crew. That's, thousands of people like that. Like for me, a lot of my work is communication and problem solving and strategy and budgeting and, overseeing a department more than actually the building of stuff. So I think everyone has a little bit of imposter syndrome, don't we, though?
It's a universal experience, but I'm so thankful for you for sharing that with us because it only ever helps to talk about this. Well, so I get a lot of secondhand joy when others experience something fantastic. And I'm curious to know, when was the last time that you were awed?
I mean, to be honest, it's because I have a 2-year-old who's developing new skills every time. And when he comes out with a whole new sentence, it just blows my mind. And I know that's not what you're asking. I know you're asking in my context of my role at Burning Man. And I am awed there. I'm awed by, in terms of that context, I think it just really moves me how much people put into what they're doing without what people typically expect as a reward. We're even the art we fund, we only fund about half of their total budget. So everyone's putting a lot of their own funding into this, and we don't fund artist time. And so, even the ones that do get grants are not getting their time covered, which is difficult for me to have to say. But, we have like our budget is quite limited on our side too. We're a nonprofit and we have to do what we can on that side. But so everyone's putting in all of this work for what reward? I mean, they're not getting paid for it. They're not getting, fame and glory, and they're not household names. Like some of the images may be something that people start seeing around, et cetera, but they're doing it because they're driven by something that's kind of more pure than a financial motivation or a, fame and glory or whatever kind of thing. But when you are at Black Rock City and you look around and you see these almost 400 artworks and you think about what went into each one, like literal blood, sweat, and tears, like people just care so much. And then you also think there are something like 8,000 to 10,000 people that are volunteering at Burning Man. that people just want to be involved and they want to help. And I'm as interested in making sure the several hundred volunteers in the art department have a good experience as the artists have a good experience. But there's something about the sense of altruism where when you are giving something without expectation for return, which is at all a Burning Man with your grilled cheeses you're making or whatever the thing is that you're offering, there's something that feels so good to us as humans when you have a thing that you're good at doing and you offer it up and you see other people enjoy it. I mean, that just makes your day, like it's worth whatever it takes to buy all that bread and grilled cheese and haul your stove out there and your, whatever it is it takes to get there. The joy you see in other people's faces, I see a lot of artists kind of stand around their project and watch people enjoy it. And some identify themselves and some don't, but just to see people interact with it in ways that you didn't even expect. And seeing my son, my 2-year-old, I brought him to Burning Man the whole time too. Like he was playing on a piece and the artist was there and we didn't know it was the artist. And she was just getting such a kick out of watching him. He was in this little like furry unicorn llama thing. It was evening time and he was playing on this little thing and she was just like beside herself by, how sweet it was. And so I think it's things like that.
Now I'm going to turn the question over to you, Ashley. When was the last time that you were awed?
I think I would echo what Katie said about, watching your kids grow is absolutely amazing. It's incredible to see the new skills that they develop. But I did have the opportunity to see hand glass blowing in Venice recently, that there was a certain piece that they were doing that my jaw actually dropped and I audibly gasped. It was incredible to see them using, just their hands and blowing into these tubes, the glass into the mold, and it came out as this massive piece. And it was just incredible what was created from such a small form. It was, like I said, I'm still kind of speechless about the whole thing. It was just absolutely incredible to see.
What about you, Eric? When were you awed?
Well, I was recently reminded that we often take our colleagues' talents for granted. IA has a lighting studio, which is both a practice and a physical space, as you're seeing in Ashley's video. And its director, Gary Bouthelette, was showing me around last week. Now, I know Gary to be a brilliant lighting designer, but he showed me a model of this work in progress. And as it turns out, he's also this brilliant artist and model maker. He constructed this miniature set out of straws and 3D printed plugs in these small programmable lights. And this was, more of a proof of concept than an actual piece of art, but it was unreal. I'm probably not even allowed to talk about this, but it really blew me away. Katie, this has been so insightful and so invigorating. I think it's a conversation we'll revisit again and again until we can join you in Black Rock City. So thank you for your generosity today.
Certainly. I'm really honored to be here, and it's fun to always get to meet new people and talk about what I love to do so much. And so thank you so much for having me here today.
Thanks for joining us for Experiential Design Week, an annual series by IA Interior Architects. If you enjoyed today's discussion, and if you appreciate great design, we invite you to visit interiorarchitects.com/EDW for more conversations with the incredible creatives we admire. While you're there, you can learn more about IA and discover the remarkable work our studios are producing around the globe.